Okay, today we're looking at 4.4, which is adding and subtracting things with higher exponents. And so we learned previously that when you multiply exponents, you really add them. And when you divide exponents, you really subtract them. But when you're adding things with an exponent, you can only add things that have the same letter and the same exponent. And when you do add them, you don't change anything. So they're really like a variable. So if I said 3x plus 2x would equal 5x's. We add the coefficients, but the variable doesn't change. Exponents are just another form of a variable, so we can only add things that are now the same letter and the same exponent. So when we look at this one, they're both x to the 4, so they have the same letter and the same exponent. So we just use our sign rules and say -6 and a +2. The signs are different, so we subtract and take the sign of the larger, so we get a -4, and then that x4 stays the same. So when you're adding like terms, that exponent doesn't change. Okay, the second one, before we even look at the numbers, because you might see the decimals and think, oh, I don't want to do a decimal, but when you look at the variables here, I have an M3 and an M5. I can't combine an M3 with an M5. So for this one, you can't simplify it. It's already in simplest form. So you just leave it like it is. You can only add things that have the same letter and the same exponent. So when we look at this next one, do you see we have an x5, an x4, and an x5? So the only ones we can combine are the x5s. So we say -3 and +9 is a +6. The x5 stays the same, and that +2x4 comes down. So you're just combining like terms. This next one, when you're looking at the variable, I've got an x squared y, an x squared y, an x squared y, an x squared y. So they all have the exact same variables. This doesn't have a number, so remember that's like a 1. And so we're just going to combine all the coefficients. So -3 plus 2 is -1. -1 minus 4 is -5. And -5 plus 1 is -4. Just using our sign rules there, and then the x squared y stays the same. Okay, this next one though is giving you a directions. It says if x equals 2, find the value of 3x squared minus 5x plus 4. So what that means, if x is 2, then we need to plug 2 in for both of these x's here. So I always tell everybody, when you're substituting in for something, put parentheses everywhere there's an x. So you see if I replace the x, the parentheses, I get that. And then, let me get a different color pen, whatever x is supposed to equal, plug in there. So x is supposed to equal 2, so I'm going to plug a 2 in both of those. Now we got to think back to chapter 1 with order of operations, which always tells us to do our exponent first. So 2 squared is really 2 times 2 or 4. So this becomes a 3 times 4 minus a 5 times 2 plus 5. So parentheses first, but there wasn't any exponents. And next we multiply. So I'm going to multiply here and here. So 3 times 4 is 12. 5 times 2 is 10. And then your plus 4. Didn't leave myself enough room here, so I'll just write it to the side. And now remember, you add and subtract from left to right. So I start here and say 12 minus 10 is 2. 2 plus 4 is 6. And 6 is our final answer. So put parentheses in where there's an x, and then follow your order of operations. So this one, again, I didn't leave myself much room, did I? This is going to be 3 parentheses to the 5th, plus 2 parentheses to the 4th, minus 5 parentheses to the 3rd, minus 2 parentheses to the 2nd. I'm just putting a parentheses everywhere there's an x. And then because it told me x equals 2, I'm going to plug a 2 in each of those places. Now remember, 2 to the 5th is not 10. 2 to the 5th is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. There's 5 of those. So you have to think 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32. So the 3 comes down, and that 2 to the 5th is 32. And then we have plus 2 times 2 to the 4th, so that's 4 of them, so let's just mark one out. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. And then I have a minus 5. with a 2 to the third. So let's mark another one out. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, and then a minus. 2 squared is 4. So I went through and did all my exponents. Now I'm going to go through and do all my multiplications. So 3 times 32 is 96. 2 times 16 is 32. The minus comes down. 5 times 8 is 40. And then minus 2 times 4 is 8. And now we're going to add and subtract from left to right. So 96 plus 32 is 128. And then let's just go ahead and, so we'll do these two. And then we can do these two. Here the signs are alike. Add and keep the same sign. And then I have 128 minus 48 is 80, I think. Yeah, is 80. So you're just doing the adding and subtracting from left to right. Okay, now let's look at these bottom ones. Same things we've been talking about, but now we have parentheses. So remember, anytime you have a negative in front of a parentheses, so order of operations tells us we go to the parentheses, but I can't add anything out here, so I look in front, which makes this a -1 there. This parentheses would have a +1, but when you distribute a +1, nothing changes. So anytime you have a positive out front the parentheses, you don't have to worry about anything. It's only when you're subtracting that this -1 is going to change all those signs. So this first parentheses is just going to stay 3x squared minus 2. But you see the second parentheses is going to come a -9x squared, a -5x, and a +3, because that negative is going to change all of those signs. And now it's a problem like we did before, where we're just combining our like terms. So here's an x squared, and here's an x squared. So I look at them and say the signs are different. So I subtract and take the sign of the larger, so that becomes a -6x squared. There's not another 5x, so I'm just going to bring that down. And then I'm going to combine my -2 and my +3. The signs are different. Subtract and take the sign of the larger. So just remember, when you combine like terms, the variable and the exponent do not change. So let's look at this next one. So again, in front of this one is just a 1, so nothing is going to change there. And so I would just write this one, and you don't even have to rewrite it if you don't want to, but that one's going to stay the same. But this one, a negative is going to be distributed on both of these, which is going to change the sign. So this makes this a -5x squared, a -4x, a -5, and a -x squared, a -2x, and a +1, because a negative times a negative is a positive. And then you're just going to start combining like terms. So here's all our x squared. So remember, if it doesn't have a number in front, it's a 1. So 6 minus 5 is 1. 1 minus 1 means there's 0x squared, so you don't have to write anything. Those just canceled each other out. Then let's look at the x's. 2x minus 4x is a -12. 2 minus 4 is a -2x. -2x and -2x is a -4x. So I combine those three. And then here, -3 and -5 is a -8. -8 plus 1 is a -7. So you just combine like terms. Now, most people have trouble with negatives, and so if you have trouble with your sign rules, the best thing to do is change all the signs and write it out. But if you're good at your sign rules, I do want to show you a shortcut. Is that you can look up here, but you just have to think minus and say 6 minus 5 is 1, minus 1 is 0. And then 2 minus 4 is -2, minus a -2 is -4x. But you have to be careful more on this last one, because this is a -3, minus 5 is -8, but -8 minus a -1 would make that a +1 or a -4. So if you're good with your sign rules, you can definitely do the shortcut, and you just have to be careful not to mess up your negatives and your signs. So this last one, same thing. I'm going to do it the long way first. So this has nothing in front, so this is going to just stay the same. but this is like a -1, which is going to change all the signs. So a negative times a negative makes that a plus 2x. A negative times a positive makes that a negative 6xy. And a negative times a positive makes that a -3. So when we're combining like terms, 3x plus 2x is 5x. 4xy minus 7xy is a -2xy. And -7 and -3 is -10. Again, a shortcut would be to say 3x minus a -2x is plus or a 5x. 4xy minus 6xy is -2xy. And -7 minus -3 is -10. So that's 4.4. You're ready to work on the 4.4 practice problems.